Hi, this is Dr. Strohman with Lifescape Medical. Sorry, I had a couple technical difficulties. Um, Today, I was going to talk about keto diet, fasting, intermittent fasting. My significant other is on a business trip, and so I'm doing this alone today. So, uh, the Coyotes have a big playoff game today, so I've got a Coyote guy next to me. Um, all right, so the outline would be I want to talk about keto diet, fasting, what the differences of those, because there's so many different variations and so many different forms you hear about, and it gets pretty confusing. And I would like to talk about sugars and carbs and fructose and how those can sort of mess around with this diet. So basically, ketogenic diet is essentially a low carb, high fat diet. So generally speaking, you're looking at 50 grams per day, generally speaking, for a keto diet. Um, so the classic keto diet's like 90% fat, and then you're talking, 5% protein carbs. And then you have modified keto diets that are 65% fat, and then 30% protein, and then 5% carbs. And then you have also low glycemic index treatments, which sort of mimic the keto, and they're 60% fat, 30% protein, 10% carbs. The low glycemic index treatment usually doesn't induce ketosis, though. So you have the ketogenic diets, which the goal is to go into ketosis, which means you're burning fat mostly. And then you have what's called time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. And the goal is essentially the same. The goal is really to drive your body into ketosis, which makes you burn fat more efficiently. Um, we all do intermittent fasting in some respect because you stop eating at 8 o'clock at night and you wake up in the morning and you have breakfast. Heck, technically, you did a 12-hour fast. So we all do that. So you have the ketogenic diet, then you have the intermittent fasting, and then intermittent fasting has many versions of that. And some of you may have heard of alternate day fasting. So you fast Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then you rest of the days you eat 50% calories. So if you're on a 1,800 calorie diet, you basically don't eat on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The rest of the days you're consuming, 900 calories. Intermittent fasting is defined as a defined period. So I am intermittent fasting 3 days a month, or I'll intermittent fast 2 days, and then I'll go a week or 2 weeks. So, and the intervals can be different. So intermittent fasting is, the basic one that's most promoted is a few days a month or a few days a quarter. And the rest of the days you eat normally and you fast technically solely. So you're just doing water, tea, coffee. And then you have 5-2, which is, you eat normally for 5 days, and then 2 days you're eating a restricted calorie count of 500 to 900. And then there's another one that's sort of a trademark by L Nutra. It's a fasting mimicking diet, and you're basically on about 900 calories for the first day, and then 500 to 700 calories for 2 to 5 days, and you're basically consuming foods produced by L Nutra, which are mimicking a fast. So you're consuming some calories with that, but it's like you're not consuming real food, so to speak. And then I think the one that I probably promote the most, and which is probably the best one to start out with, because I'll talk about some complications with these diets, is time restricted eating, where basically you say I'm going to eat 8 hours a day and I'm going to be fasting 16 hours a day. So, for instance, what I typically do is I'll skip breakfast, remain hydrated, have a good, decent sized lunch, and then try to eat an early dinner. And so 12 to 8 would be the goal. And as you become accustomed to that, you can actually shrink that window down. So instead of a 16-8, you could do a 24, 20 fasting for eating, and you can vary these things. So you can do time restricted a couple weeks, and then maybe doing intermittent fasts once a quarter. So the goal is really to see if it really benefits you, and it's not going to benefit everybody. And there's some studies saying, you know, some people have genetic SNPs and different genetic setups where ketogenic diets work great in that person, but with my partner, maybe she does terrible with it. So the whole point is to figure out what works. So generally speaking, in a fed state, so when you have eaten, your body's using carbs and fats. If you're in a fed state, basically your body's converting any glucose you consume in your liver, and it converts it to glycogen, which is basically a storage form of energy. And insulin regulates this. When you're in a fasting state, your liver starts to, you basically need energy to think and to move. Your body, your liver burns glycogen. So it basically converts glycogen storage in your liver to glucose, and then you basically, you're surviving with that. After a prolonged fast, based on the guidelines say 15 to 20 hours, anywhere in between, your sugars start to deplete, your insulin gets suppressed, which is actually a good thing to have low insulin. We don't like high insulin. High insulin basically is a builder. It builds things, and in anyone's case, it's building fat. We don't want that. So after a fast, your insulin gets suppressed. You start mobilizing fat from fat cells, and that's called lipolysis. So it's converting fat to energy. So you break down from a fat cell, breaks it down, goes into a free fatty acid. That free fatty acid can then be mobilized for energy. And then you start getting ketogenesis, where you start producing ketones, and that's done by, of course, the liver. And that's produced by the mitochondria in the liver cells, and they start producing fatty acids, and those are then converted to ketones, which is beta hydroxybutyrate, which can be used by tissues. Oh, there's a question by Jim. I was just making sure he's getting it. So ketogenesis, after prolonged fast, you get liver generation of fatty acids. Those are converted to the ketones, which is what we're trying to get at. And that hydroxybutyrate can be used by the brain, because the brain can easily use mostly sugar, and then it can rely on these ketones. So that's the basis of fed state versus a fasting state versus having a prolonged fast or going on a keto diet. You're basically telling your body to start flexing and burning fats. And as your body becomes more used to that, your body adjusts, and you become a little more flexible. So I've mentioned maybe to a few patients about metabolic flexibility. And there's a device I've used. I don't have it with me, but it's a thing you can breathe into. It basically tells you on a percentage basis, are you burning fats efficient? Are you burning fats at the time? Or are you burning carbs? Or are you burning a mixture? And I think metabolic flexibility is sort of an important feature to this. So when you're not burning carbs so quickly, you don't get as hungry as quickly. So if you're burning fat, you tend to have a fuller stomach, feel satiated. Sometimes that has to do with the ketones, and you're not eating every 2 to 3 hours, which back in med school, we were told, eat every 3 to 4 hours. And again, that may not be the best, because that sort of promotes insulin being released all the time. And again, insulin is basically a builder of things. And if you want to trim up or convert body fat to muscle, that may be not the best thing. My son is sort of like this. He sort of eats every 2 to 3 hours. That could be because he's 11, but it could also be because he's consuming quite a bit of carbs. And then, so if you're burning ketosis, so metabolic flexibility, ketosis, you start activating some genetic programming to burn fat, and you make ketones. And these genetic programmings can actually help with longevity. And again, like I said, not everybody responds similarly. So you have to sort of, with your physician, figure out a good means that you can do this. And the whole goal is, again, I think metabolic flexibility, and then affecting lifespan. Not just lifespan, but health span. So lifespan, hopefully we live longer, but health span is we want to live longer and be healthier until the end of our lives. So what do you gain by all of this? We're basically gaining a few things. So it suppresses your appetite, for one. So if you're in ketosis, via a ketotic diet or fasting, and many of those versions, you basically suppress your appetite. Those beta hydroxybutyrate and the acetoacetate, those are the ketotic fats that you're burning. They basically reduce your appetite. So your drive to eat goes down. You lower your blood sugars. If you lower your blood sugars, your insulin starts to go down. So I see some patients with sort of somewhat elevated sugars. We check their insulin and they're running a little bit high normal. If you go on one of these ketotic diets or a fast, you're actually going to reduce that insulin. If you reduce the insulin, your body doesn't build as much. And even if you consume about the same amount of calories, albeit a little differently, via time or ketotic or high fats, you basically suppress insulin, you stop building. You stop building fat. You can lose body weight a little easier. Let's see. Oh, yeah. And there's a genetic, it's called mTOR. It's basically a genetic code in your system. And if you suppress mTOR, your body starts to induce autophagy. And so this is a new term, autophagy. So fasting is the most stimulating. Fasting stimulates autophagy quite well. There's some other products that you might have heard of, metformin, which is used in diabetics and pre-diabetics, rapamycin, and resveratrol. They all stimulate this pathway called mTOR. And mTOR basically gets you some longevity. It starts to induce some factors that induce longevity. So let's see here. How else can you induce autophagy? You can do that with extreme temperatures. So you've heard sort of hot, cold. Exercise can actually do that too, and hypoxia can do that. Let's see. So you gain not only appetite suppression, reducing of insulin, there's probably some longevity with this, which again can be induced by prescription medicines, non-prescription supplements, and fasting and ketotic diets. Let's see, how to measure. So if you really want to measure what's going on in your system, there's a lot of sticks and breath things you can use, and all they're trying to really detect is if you're going into ketosis. So you can do that through breath. They have sticks, you can pee on some, and really to get into ketosis, if you're on a dietary supplement or if you're doing it dietary wise versus a fast, you try to want to consume under 50 grams to do that. You can accomplish this absolutely with probably an 18 plus hour fast also, which you can get into ketosis. And then I have a little machine. I don't have it on me, it's downstairs. You can actually blow into it and it determines how much you're burning fat and how much you're burning carbs. And it's sort of on a 1 to 5 scale. 5 you're burning solely carbs and 1 you're burning solely fats. And if you can see a variety of these numbers, that's good. But if you're kind of doing these and you're always getting 5s, it just might take longer. Or you might have one of these genetic alterations that doesn't allow you to do well on a ketotic diet or fast. So if you're going to implement one of these, I typically would recommend you start with the time-restricted eating, which gets your body sort of set up for this. Obviously, initially, your body might not react very well. So you can get headaches and diarrhea and fatigue and tiredness. And if that's the case, then maybe instead of your 16 fast, 8 eat, maybe you just, shrink it to 12 or 13. And again, as your body adjusts, you get more metabolic flexibility, and then you'll be able to extend that. So usually we just say baby steps. So time-restricted eating. If you're feeling terrible, end the fast sooner. You can try again the next day. Obviously, you can reduce carbs. So if you're a high-carb eater, you may want to just start with restricting calories for 12 hours and cut your carb dose by a quarter, 25%. The other option is, try to do these intermittent fast or ketotic diets and then have a third day where you're having kind of your normal-ish diet. Do it with a family member. Try to do it with a friend. Try to do it with a wife or a colleague. Try to have some reward. We can't go anywhere these days. I was going to say go to a movie or go to a hockey game at the end of a month. So have some sort of feature that gives you some sort of internal reward system. The other thing with implementing is hydration, because if you wake up in the morning, typically have eggs, bacon, toast, or cereal, or whatever you're eating for breakfast, you're skipping that morning breakfast. And you get water from any sort of food. So hydration is super important, especially when you're first starting this out. So if you are skipping breakfast, you definitely want to drink a lot of fluids and waters. Other things, fiber, that's important for gut health anyway. It helps your gut microbiome. And then carbs you're reducing, to 50 to 100 grams if you're doing the ketotic diet. If you're just doing intermittent fasting, you can always, you're eating a smaller window of time, and hopefully you're consuming less carbs, but you don't have to. Wouldn't recommend doing like a time restricted eating plus ketotic diet. So you kind of want to choose one of these. I'm using these interchangeably because they're both inducing ketosis. So carbs, good carbs, avocados, fruits, blueberries, nuts, dark chocolate, and you want to try to limit any simple carbs. And this is one of the points I want to really drive home is what is the difference between fructose, which is a fruit sugar, and glucose. So not all carbs are created equally. So when you look on a label and it says 25 grams of carbs, you really have to dive down a little further on what is really in there. So I want to mention sugar binds to proteins. When it binds to proteins, it basically starts to decompose. So essentially there's a browning effect. And you can see it in bananas. So you put a banana on the counter, it starts to brown pretty quickly. And that's happening in your body. So we're all technically browning. We're all technically quote unquote aging. Glucose does that at a certain rate. It's, we can't get around it. We're living on Earth and we are all aging. Can't prevent that. The interesting thing is if you do that with fructose, which is found in sucrose, which is basically sugar, that browning rate happens at the rate of 7 times the rate of glucose. So essentially you're kind of aging quicker than you really need to. I listened to this Dr. Lustig, and he's an endocrinologist, and he said, it's just stuck with me. If there's a label on the food you're eating, it is basically a warning sign. It means it's been processed. It's not quote unquote real food. So if you're looking at labels and you're looking at them all the time, it might be a sign that maybe you're consuming too many processed foods. Does broccoli have a nutrition label on it? Does meat have a nutrition label on it when you get it from the butcher? No, those are quote unquote real foods. So try to stick to real foods. And fructose is basically, again, found in fruit, but it's also basically high dose. You hear of high fructose corn syrup. It's found in sugars, and sugars are added to everything. So fructose is typically, storage form of a plant. It's a plant uses fructose, just like we use glycogen. So it's super good at repleting our glycogen levels. So this is why Gatorade was so popular, or is so popular with athletes is, I think in an NHL, NFL, NBA athlete, they probably do need to replete them more quickly than us. If we're just doing a half hour, 45 minutes of exercise, probably don't need any fructose to replete our glycogen stores. So not a big fan of Gatorade, except, if you're out in the heat for an hour, maybe you do a G2. But fructose is 5-ringed, glucose is 6-ringed. So it sounds like it's just a sugar, right? No, it's not. It's fructose has to be actually metabolized to form an energy source that we can use. And fructose has to be converted, sucks actually ATP to do that, to get it to a form that we can actually use. Interesting also, when you consume fructose and it enters your stomach, usually you get a response where you feel satiated or filled. With fructose, you don't get that. So usually if you eat a food, your body releases ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hormone that makes you feel satiated. Fructose does not stimulate at all. So you can see if you consume that, hour or two later, you're hungry. Consume it again, hour or two later, you're hungry. So you get in this pathway where you're just always consuming it. Also, when we check physicals, we're always checking A1C, which is an average sugar mark. Interestingly, if you consume a lot of fructose, the A1C it won't be accounted for. Fructose actually binds at a different spot on the hemoglobin. So if your A1C is sort of 5.8, which is sort of borderline for diabetes, that actually might be higher because fructose is not binding to that spot. So we're actually not picking it up. Also, fruit is good. Fruit with fiber. So I'm a big proponent of fruit and fiber. Fruit and fiber, so you consume 100 calories of fruit. Probably half of that's fibrous, and that's going to feed your good bacteria, and possibly 50 of it will be stored as, eventually as glycogen. So there's a huge difference between fructose and glucose. And glucose is, again, the energy source of most of your body. Fructose is it's just dangerous. I mean, it's essentially, it browns you, it's aging you quicker than it has to. Let's see, what else on this? Oh, I had a question on exogenous ketones. So BHB. Interestingly, I saw a lecture on this. Yes, you can use it. I guess it's what point are you using it for? So if you're if you're trying to accomplish a keto diet and you're down to 50 grams of carbs, your body is already producing these exogenous ketone supplements. So you probably don't need them because basically you're giving yourself an energy source that you're trying to tell your body to start burning fat from your fat cells and liver. So exogenous ketones, probably if you're in a ketotic diet, I probably wouldn't recommend it. If you're doing more of the intermittent fasting and trying to kind of get some metabolic flexibility, I could see using these as a good energy source. I mean, I've read people use caffeine and a little keto to give them a little boost in the morning. So it's, again, a good energy source. Any type of exogenous ketone or endogenous ketone is going to be an inflammatory. It actually prevents inflammation, so it can actually lower your CRPs. Again, this is another reason to consider intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, or ketotic diets. And again, not everybody. They put the lumen. That is the thing I use to figure out where I'm going. And initially, when I used the lumen, that device that basically tells you what percent you're burning fat or carbs, I was burning 5s and 4s and 5s and 4s. And then as I progressed, there was a certain, and I've seen other patients where there's a certain fast that sort of induces this. So some people can get away with a 12-hour fast and they start burning, fats pretty efficiently, and others need 16, 18 hours, or some people need to consider doing intermittent fasting where you're fasting for a couple days. But the lumen, I really like the lumen. What fats to consume when you're on these diets? I mean, we want to do more monosaturated. You have to watch out for saturated fats, and occasionally people that have this SNP, a little genetic alteration, they just don't metabolize that fat very well, and you'll see LDLs increase. But as you get used to the diet, your LDLs will spike and then they'll start to come down a little bit. But in some individuals, LDLs remain high, so you have to watch that. Fish and nuts for fat. Exogenous ketones you can do intermittently, but I wouldn't do it if you're really doing a strict keto diet. Also, the logic on keto diet is you probably shouldn't be in it for months and months and months. I've seen 6 weeks, then come out of it, go into a modified keto, and then go back. Again, you could go into an intermittent fast. I think the point that I'm maybe trying to drive here is metabolic flexibility and always changing your diet a little bit. I mean, to stick to one diet for years is pretty difficult. If you're always tweaking it a little bit, I think that's good. And if you're tweaking it based on lab reports, I think that's even better. So, coordinating with your physician on this, I think it's important. Supplements, again, hydration can be huge. I think vitamin B, magnesium. Some people don't sleep very well when they're on these diets. So you can consider glycine, sometimes magnesium at night. So sometimes there's some complications with that. Caffeine, especially for fasting. I mean, if you're consuming, 1 cup of coffee contains 80 milligrams of caffeine. If you're doing 200-300 milligrams of coffee, caffeine products, it's probably going to be very difficult to come off that. That would be a slow taper. So you would consider, if you're doing a time restricted eating, still doing your caffeine in the morning, but maybe cutting it back over the course of a month. I told you about sleep, putting on muscle. That's another thing I see is, can you do a ketotic diet or a fast and put on muscle or build muscle? And yes, you can. I think you have to sort of time it so that, in a 48-hour fast, you're probably not going to be building. You're not in a building mode. If you're trying to burn fat and try to trim up. So basically, if you're going to do training with this, you try to want to work around the training. So if you're in a time restricted eating and eating, 12 to 8, maybe you try to exercise middle of the day, or 6, you maybe don't want to exercise first thing in the morning. Although again, if your goal is to burn fat and you do a time restricted eating, it would be a good idea to do it right in the morning, because your body is ready to go and is looking for calories. And if you start exercising, your body might go directly towards adipose sites and liver and start burning fat immediately. So again, it depends on what your goal is. So and that's all I have for now. I've answered a few of the questions, I think. Are there any other questions? I guess we're at the 30-minute mark. Anything else? I think some patients have been doing the ApoE4 test. That's sort of a marker for or a risk for Alzheimer's, but it's also how your body manages cholesterol. So ApoE4s, if you know what I'm talking about, we check this quite a bit of the time. You basically you have to be careful, because if you consume fat, you might consume it and it directly causes LDLs to go skyrocketing. So if you're in the group where you have an ApoE4 gene, you might have to watch your saturated fats. So, and sometimes we have to put people on statins if their LDLs don't come down, or maybe the ketotic diet's not great for you. So if you're ApoE4, that's a huge thing. And then generally for losing weight or getting trim, essentially you want to reduce insulin, because the insulin is the enemy, essentially. It builds you, and you do that by restricting carbs. You can do that with metformin, which is a medication we use for prediabetes. Sleep is huge. So if you're not sleeping very well, that basically screws up a lot of hormones, thyroid and testosterone. So focusing on getting good sleep. And if you have sleep apnea, I've seen a couple patients with pretty bad sleep apnea that had a hard time losing weight. They got their sleep apnea treated and they started losing weight easier. So again, not everybody, but it's a factor. And then again, maybe doing keto diet if that fits you, or doing one of these versions of fasting, from intermittent fasting to time restricted eating. I think the first thing to consider is doing that time restricted eating and seeing how you feel with it. And can you do coffee during a fast? I think I alluded to that. I said, yes, you can. It depends on how many caffeine milligrams you're consuming. Again, if you're doing 300 milligrams a day, you probably want to taper that down. And in your coffee, if you're on a keto diet, you can do keto. You could do some keto supplements like MCT oil in your coffee to make it taste a little better, and then scale that down as you go along. And that's it for now. Any other questions? I'll sign off. They put that lumen.me in the comment section, so you can check that out. And if you have questions, you can always send me a post and I can answer it for you. All right, signing off. Have a good day.